Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Now today we're going to be talking about cohabbing your leopard geckos. Now a while ago I did a video on this, 4 years ago to be exact, and though some of the points made in that video still remain correct, one kinda needs to be updated or at least needs more explanation. So first let's look at the points that remain the same. So number 1, you cannot house 2 or more males together. Males must live alone. They're territorial and will fight. It doesn't matter if they're clutch mates and brothers, you know, like have you seen Lion King? They will fight. But no, seriously, 2 male leopard geckos can fight to the death, so do not house them together. Number 2, a male and female should not be housed together. If you're a breeder, of course, at some time in a year, you're going to bring them together so they can actually breed, but they shouldn't be housed together all the time. And as pets, if you're not breeding, do not house them together. I've had so many people that will message me about it. I say you should probably separate them, and they go, it's okay, they're not breeding, they seem to be getting on fine. And literally a few weeks down the line, they'll be either saying, oh, now they're fighting, or they'll say, help, my gecko is laying fertile eggs, what do I do? Which is super frustrating when I've already told them to split them up and they just didn't. On the topic of babies, number 3, a baby and adult should not live together. In the wild, adult leopard geckos will eat anything that fits in their mouth, including smaller lizards, so there's an incredibly high chance your gecko may eat or very viciously attack the baby. And finally, number 4, and probably the most obvious, do not house a leopard gecko with other geckos, like African fat-tailed geckos, for example. There's a lot of gecko species out there that kind of look a little bit like leopard geckos, but that does not mean they have similar requirements, nor does that mean they'll get along, so just do not house them with other geckos. So what part of the old video did I want to update? Well, basically it was the part about housing 2 or more females together. Now it's quite apparent that I do not cohab my geckos. I have 3 females, they all live separately, but back in the day, I feel it was widely accepted that if you had 2 females of the same size, they could live together. But early on in my experience with leopard geckos, I found Gizmo and Minnie, for example, if I ever got them out on the floor together just to see how they'd get along, Minnie would flatten herself down and just freeze. It's almost like Gizmo didn't even know it, but Gizmo is probably the dominant one and Minnie was submissive, and I thought this combination would never work in a tank. So very early on I did question, really, does this actually work? Is it actually a good idea? Now when I did this, that was 12 years ago, and attitudes have certainly changed. It's more accepted now that all leopard geckos should be housed separately. It may seem quite alien to us, surely our geckos will be bored, surely they'll want a friend, but it's probably the best. Now, there are some exceptions to the rules. In some cases it can work, however it requires constant monitoring, it's probably more stress than it's worth, and it doesn't always last a whole lifetime. Now I have heard of cases from Jessica's Animal Friends here on YouTube, where her 2 geckos who have severe Enigma syndrome do better together than they do apart. I also saw in Cohabbing's video on this subject that he has actually successfully paired females 3 times. However, as he points out, you really have to keep an eye on them. For example, I've had plenty of messages from people who tell me that their 2 geckos are getting on fine, but then a few things kind of raise concerns. For example, they'll say everything's going well, they're fine, but I've got one that's really big and one that's really skinny. Now to me, the bigger one seems like the dominant one, it's eating all the food before the other one can get to it. They may also say they're getting on great, but one spends all its time in its cold hide, and one spends all the time in its warm hide. Now once again, if this is a continuous thing, the one in the warm hide is probably the dominant one, and if the submissive one doesn't get adequate heating, her health will suffer. I also hear they're getting on fine, then a few weeks later, one of the geckos has a cut on them and they don't know how, but most likely the other one has attacked it. See, this is the thing I think, 2 females can seem totally fine, especially as babies and growing up, you think everything's going fine, why would I separate them? But as I said, it doesn't always last a lifetime. This isn't really gecko related, but it's somewhat related. Basically, I knew someone who had 2 male dwarf hamsters living together. Now, I don't know anything about dwarf hamsters or who they should live with or whatever, but they seemingly lived happily together for absolutely ages until one morning they found the hamster had viciously killed the other to the point it actually looked like it had started eating it. So, things can change very quickly. Now, I'm very aware there's a spectrum of views on this subject. Some people will strongly believe females can get along, some will strongly believe they should be housed separately, and some are kind of in the middle. Now, if you're asking for my advice, I would say keep them separate. As I said, in some cases it may work, but it does require constant monitoring. It might not always last, and you must be prepared to separate them if things go wrong. It's very frustrating to me to hear someone getting 2 geckos, then they will fight, and when I say you really need to separate them, they say, oh, I can't afford another setup. From my point of view, if you're ever going to attempt to house 2 geckos together, even if you buy them at the same time from the same shop, you should always have a second setup ready just in case. Even if that's like a temporary setup, it doesn't have to be a really fancy expensive one. You can have like an Exoterra Faunarium, I think they're called. They're cheaper, but if things go wrong, you want something to house the other one in. Now, before I completely rule out cohabbing your geckos, I did just want to look at the other side of things, look at what we know about the social structure of leopard geckos in the wild, and whether that will give us a better insight about their behaviour towards each other. So, from what I've read, there's usually an alpha male that controls a certain territory. Within that territory, the male has a number of females which he'll defend and breed with. He'll also fight off male intruders, remove any growing males, and also set up communal and solitary hides and even a toilet, which will be further away from the main burrows, which is super interesting because you may have observed this yourself, but in captivity, a leopard gecko tends to choose its toilet as the furthest part away from its main sleeping hide. So that's normally the warm hide, and I find my geckos will, a lot of them actually go upwards and poop on like a really high rock. But yeah, this does make you wonder, realistically, could you recreate this in captivity? Could you recreate this social structure? I'd say you would need an incredibly big enclosure, so much so that each gecko has their own fully functioning living quarters where they can escape to if things get heated, and of course having a male in the tank, you're running a high risk of having babies. I feel this would be something best left to a zoo or some reptile centre place that have a really big enclosure that they can recreate the wild in. I don't think this is something you can really recreate in a 20, 30, even 50 gallon tank. To me, I think it would require a lot more. Personally, at the moment, as I said, if you were to ask me what to do, I would say just house your geckos separately. Even in my room, I have 1 male, 3 females. They each have their own tank, but they can still smell each other. They still communicate via pheromones. My females will still ovulate and lay eggs. My male will make mating displays in the middle of the night that kind of wake you up and freak you out because his tail's whipping. But, you know, they live happily on their own. Anyway, I hope this has cleared things up and presented both sides of the argument well, but let me know, what do you think? What is your experience? Do you think 2 females can work together, or do you think it's best they live on their own? Before I go, I do just want to give a big shout out to Laura, who has been a patron for this channel for an entire year now, so thank you so much to Laura. Honestly, like, patrons, you're amazing. I'll leave Laura's Instagram handle below so you can check her out if you like. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already, please subscribe. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.